People loved Rascal Dennis on screen, but the drama behind the scenes was something no one saw coming. What seemed like a simple, innocent family sitcom was actually a powder keg of problems, fights, and emotional breakdowns. The truth surrounding Dennis the Menace was anything from child's play. There were forgotten mishaps, overworked young actors, and cast members who were quietly suffering off camera. And it all began with a risky bet. A choice that would make a child famous and start a downhill spiral that would follow Jay North for the rest of his life. It's a bad system. People who work there are mean. They don't care. During the golden age of American television, when family comedy and clean children's shows controlled prime time, CBS started to come up with a fresh idea. The network wanted something new, a family sitcom that was like Leave It to Beaver but with more fun and trouble. The solution is a show based on Hank Ketcham's comic strip Dennis the Menace. The cartoon had already caught the attention of newspaper readers with its mischievous little boy in overalls and a slingshot in his pocket. His grin spelled danger for Mr. Wilson, the impoverished neighbor. But it turned out to be harder than planned to bring a comic strip to life on television. The studio required more than simply a pretty face. They wanted a cute, wild child with the proper amount of charisma to carry a whole series. There were a lot of child performers who were looked at. Jay North, who would later earn the part, was turned down at first, which is funny. The bosses thought he was too quiet, too shy, or maybe even too well behaved. But the people in charge of Screen Gems Studios knew something. They didn't want a young star who was already famous. They needed someone new, someone they could boss about. Jay North, with his big eyes and soothing voice, became their blank slate. He was only 6 years old, yet people were already pushing him into the spotlight. His aunt and uncle, who were his legal guardians, wanted him to do well. They thought Dennis the Menace was their golden ticket. Jay got the part, and production moved rapidly. Sets were erected, scripts were finished, and the tone was carefully chosen to reflect the comic strip's fun and crazy style. Kids will have fun, and adults will remember things from their childhood. But even before the cameras started rolling, things were starting to go wrong. Jay wasn't inherently rowdy. He was bashful and quiet off camera. He was a child who would rather be alone than cause trouble. Producers didn't pay attention to it. It didn't matter how comfortable Jay was as long as he brought Dennis to life on TV. No one knew that pushing a youngster so far away from who he truly was every day would have a price. The picture of Dennis the Menace may have been flawless, but there was a small child behind it who was already being sucked into something he couldn't control. When Jay North was just 6 years old, he became famous. He had the kind of face that casting directors liked on paper. Bright eyes, a sweet smile, and just the proper amount of trouble to fit the part. But there was a boy behind the smile who didn't want any of it. Jay didn't want to be famous. He was shy and quiet, and he was happiest when he was alone with a book or a sketchpad. But suddenly, he changed into Dennis the Menace, the most famous kid in America. From the very first day, Jay felt like he was stuck in a character that wasn't really him. Dennis was crazy and full of energy on screen. Jay was quiet and sensitive off screen, and he didn't see why he had to act like someone else. But the camera was still on and the stress never stopped. The network had put a lot of money on the show doing well, so Dennis, who was Jay, couldn't have a terrible day. His aunt and uncle took care of every facet of his early upbringing. They were in charge of more than just taking care of him, they were also in charge of his career, image, and money. Later, Jay said they were severe and didn't care about him emotionally. There wasn't much support. There was almost no comfort, and you weren't allowed to show tension or anger. Jay didn't have any time to just be a kid since young actors were treated like small professionals. He was told off if he forgot a line. People advised him to keep going even if he seemed exhausted. There were no breaks for growing aches or stress. Jay had to deliver, whether he wanted to or not, and the Dennis character had to shine. The cracks started to show soon. Jay became quieter between takes and often avoided eye contact or stayed by himself. He was still making people laugh on TV, but off-screen, the actual child was becoming more and more withdrawn. Some people could see the shift, but not many were brave enough to say anything. What hurt the most was how lonely he felt. People thought Dennis was great, but not many asked how Jay was doing. He was the star of the show, but no one seemed to care that it was slowly killing him. And as the pressure grew, the set surrounding him changed into something even harder to deal with. People at home thought that the set of Dennis the Menace looked like a wonderful image of suburban life. Every episode had well-kept lawns, clean kitchens, and happy family times. But behind the camera, things weren't nearly as nice. What appeared like unfettered fun on film was actually a closely controlled, high-pressure place where there was a lot of anxiety. Jay North wasn't the only one who felt it. The whole production had to stick to a stringent timeline and didn't allow for many mistakes. Directors wanted things to be exact. Writers thought that lines should be read exactly as they were written. Even the youngest members of the cast were expected to act like adults. They didn't want people to make things up. Creativity was put on hold in favor of regularity, and few people were brave enough to break the rules behind the scenes. Jay's guardians helped keep this strictness in place. They were always with him, keeping an eye on his performance and looking for any signs of deviance. Things weren't going well between them and the production crew. People fought over Jay's behavior, his tiredness, or how he was getting more and more uncomfortable. One crew member said the mood was like walking on eggshells. The stress wasn't only mental, it was also physical. One time, a prop broke down and almost hurt a team member. The event was carefully kept from the public, but it made a lot of people uneasy. Production couldn't afford to be late, let alone have a controversy. Keeping the concert on track came before safety considerations. Over time, reports began to come out about long hours, tired young actors, and anxieties that weren't addressed. The cheerful anarchy that was shown on film was planned and carefully controlled. It wasn't spontaneous at all. Everything was meticulously planned to fit the needs of the network. Some of the adult cast members, especially those who were close to Jay, realized that he was growing more and more alone, but not many of them did anything about it. The culture of the studios didn't support it. People saw Jay as the main performer, the brand, and the product, not a kid who was having a hard time. And with each passing episode, the difference between what was real and what was fake on screen grew. But the show was still a hit. The ratings stayed high. Fan mail kept flowing in, and no one at home knew how delicate the show had become. Until one day, a cherished cast member disappeared for good, and everything changed. Mr. Wilson was a big part of Dennis the Menace for millions of fans. The neighbor who was always angry yet lovely and always annoyed by Dennis's innocent turmoil became one of the show's most famous characters. Joseph Carnes did a great job playing the part. His timing was perfect, his facial expressions were priceless, and he had great chemistry with little Jay North. But beneath his funny anger was a father quietly fighting something much worse than a hungry youngster. Joseph Carnes left in February 1962 without telling supporters ahead of time. It didn't take long for the official news to come. He experienced a brain hemorrhage and died unexpectedly. The announcement shocked both the cast and the audience. Viewers were sad to hear that Mr. Wilson had died, and people on work were shocked by the sudden loss of the actor who had been the heart of the show's adult ensemble. What not many people knew, though, was that Carnes had been having health problems for months. There were rumors that he had passed out on set before, but the show went on nevertheless. Friends said that in the last several weeks of filming, he had lost a lot of weight and looked more and more tired. But the network had no intentions to stop. The ratings were high, the deadlines were tight, and Carnes, being a professional, wouldn't let anyone down. The setback was more than just a professional blow for Jay North. It was about me. Carnes was one of the few adults in the cast that was kind and patient with him. Carnes treated Jay like a real child, whereas others saw him as a product or a tool for performance. He made jokes with him, listened to him, and even attempted to help him relax when he could. Jay said that Carnes was a kind person who made everything seem less terrifying. The people who made the show were fast to change. They added a new character named Gail Gordon as John Wilson, Mr. Wilson's brother, just a few episodes later to keep the tale going. Even though Gordon was a seasoned performer, the change seemed strange. Fans could tell something was wrong, and the alteration made things even worse behind the scenes. There wasn't enough time to mourn or think. Time to get back to work. smiling for the camera, but hurting behind it. People have quietly criticized the events that led to Carnes's death since then. Some people think that his illness may have gotten worse because of his busy schedule. Some people think he was just too dedicated and didn't want to exhibit weakness or seek for aid. In any case, his death changed everything for the cast and crew. The death of Mr. Wilson left a hole in the show that ratings and recasting could never entirely fix. It reminded Jay that even those who felt comfortable may abruptly disappear. And as the pressures of becoming famous grew, the last bits of comfort from childhood were swiftly fading. But there was still one person on site who tried to protect him from everything, even though it could cost her job. Gloria Henry played the perfect mother on film. She was kind, sophisticated, and always had a warm smile or a mild scolding ready for Dennis when he went out of hand. She was the perfect 1960s TV matriarch, but Gloria was nothing like the quiet housewife her role played. In fact, she was one of the few people who would stand up for what she thought was right, and what she observed behind the scenes really bothered her. Gloria entered Dennis the Menace with years of acting experience already behind her, and she instantly noted how different this set felt. The energy was stiff, the tone was too professional, and the unstated rule was evident. Don't question the system. But Gloria was very perceptive, and it didn't take long for her to feel bad about how Jay North was being handled. She could see how much stress the young child was under, how scared he was when he made a mistake, and how his guardians acted like watchdogs instead of protectors. Gloria tried to make Jay feel safe from the start. While others stayed away, she tried to connect with him between scenes by talking to him and giving him encouragement. Sometimes it was as easy as sitting next to him during lunch breaks or simply telling him he had done a nice job. Jay subsequently remarked that those short hours with Gloria were the only times he felt like a real person and not a role. But the higher-ups did notice Gloria's work, and it wasn't in a positive way. When she asked about several scripts that made Dennis the target of more and more cruel jokes, she was told off. Producers told her to stop getting in the way and reminded her of her place. At one point, she was told that if she kept pushing back, her position could be completely cut. It was a planned threat that almost worked. Even so, she wouldn't give up. Gloria thought the show was slowly ruining Jay, and she wouldn't let it go. She couldn't change the system, but she could at least be a buffer, someone who wouldn't look away while a youngster was under strain. It may have been quiet, but her support was important. Later, Jay North would say that Gloria Henry was one of the only individuals on set who really cared about him. Over time, her influence led to small changes for the better. Scripts got easier. Jay had a little more time off between takes, and although while the overall atmosphere was still tough, there was at least one adult who didn't treat him like a product. In interviews years later, Jay talked of Gloria's support with real emotion, saying she was the only person who actually cared about how he was feeling. But even though she didn't say anything, the damage was already done. Jay's tiredness grew impossible to mask as the series got closer to its last season. He wasn't just tired anymore. He was coming apart. And the fame that had once made him famous was now coming at him from all sides. The end was near. And when it did, no one was ready. When Dennis the Menace was in its last season, there were clues that were hard to miss. Jay North was having a hard time. He was having a hard time. What had started as a progressive loss of happiness had turned into complete emotional fatigue. The happy, bouncing youngster that fans loved had turned silent, distant, and withdrawn. And those who were closest to him couldn't or wouldn't step in behind the scenes. Jay was only 11 years old, yet he had already been through more stress than most people. As the show became more popular, its demands only grew stronger. There were more commercial events, longer days of filming, and more pressure on him to be Dennis both on and off camera. He was flown all over the country to go to events, shown off to people, and told to always keep in character. Former cast and crew members would subsequently remember how different he had become, even when he was sick, fatigued, or begging for a break. He didn't make jokes between takes anymore. He didn't talk to other kids very much. Some days, he would cry softly in his dressing room, thinking no one would hear him, but the cameras kept rolling. Jay later said that those years seemed like being a prisoner, stuck in a role that everyone loved while the real guy departed without a word. He felt even worse since he was so alone. As he became more distant, his guardians and producers saw it as an attitude problem or unprofessionalism. Instead of helping, they made things worse. He was instructed to get his act together, be thankful, and quit whining. His guardians, who were also in charge of his care and business, reportedly told him that he was being immature. They were more interested in the money, the contracts, and the next season than the boy behind the brand. Jay was so stressed out at one point that he started purposefully ruining takes, hoping that making mistakes over and over again would give him a break. Instead, it got him in more trouble and more stress. People said he was hard to deal with. In actuality, he was desperate for someone to see that he was breaking apart. The toll went beyond the set. Jay was treated differently at school. His classmates thought of him as a famous person, not a classmate. He had a hard time making friends. He felt even more disconnected when teachers were said to have favored him. He once stated he felt like he was living in two worlds, one where strangers admired him and another where no one really knew him. After the last season ended, the show's creators started looking for fresh ways to take it. There has been a small drop in ratings. Dennis was getting older, and the character's charm was diminishing. But Jay didn't feel better. He felt like he had been thrown away. After years of carrying the weight of a full production, the finale came not with celebration but with stillness. There were no meaningful goodbyes, no therapy offered, and no preparations to help him get back to normal life. The light just went out. And Jay North was all alone, famous, weak, and entirely unprepared for what was about to happen. But years later, the world would finally hear what he had to say. And what he said shocked even his biggest followers. Jay North disappeared from the public eye almost as swiftly as he had come to it when Dennis the Menace ended in 1963. The show had made him famous, but it had also taken almost everything from him. His youth, his faith in adults, and for a while even his sense of who he was. Jay felt lost without the structure of filming every day and the constant pressure to do well. He didn't have a genuine strategy, any advice, or any notion how to act like a regular teenager. Jay tried to keep acting in the years that followed, but the business had already put him in a box. He would always be Dennis to casting directors. And that label was a prison for Jay. As a young adult, it was almost impossible for him to get meaningful roles or be considered seriously. The happy troublemaking that had once made him America's favorite troublemaker was now a burden he couldn't get away from. His mental health got worse as his career went down. Jay fought with severe melancholy, loneliness, and a developing conviction that he had been used and thrown away. He stopped talking to almost everyone from his past for a while. He later said that he had trouble with wrath, bewilderment, and extended periods of stillness when he would shut the world out. The fame was gone, but the harm was still there. Jay North didn't start to speak out until years later, when he was an adult. He only talked about how bad it was for him when filming Dennis the Menace in a few interviews in the 1980s and 1990s. He was honest about the emotional abuse he went through, how he didn't get any help or protection, and how the event left him with wounds that will last a long time. His statements were raw, open, and brutally honest, and they upset a lot of admirers who had looked up to him as a child. In one very revealing interview, Jay said that when he was a teenager, he almost killed himself. He couldn't take the stress anymore and thought the people who were supposed to care about him didn't see him. It was only through the intervention of a close friend that he managed to pull through. That moment changed everything for him and made him want to really heal. Jay North went in a very different direction as an adult. He quit acting and found purpose in being an advocate. He became a staunch supporter of legislation that protect child actors and worked with groups that wanted to keep other kids from going through what he did. He also worked as a correctional officer, which was very different from Hollywood. He found meaning in structure and duty. Jay has remarked that he doesn't hate the fans when he looks back. He knows that a lot of people adored Dennis. It still hurts that so few people ever asked about Jay. People still think of Dennis the Menace as a cute old TV show. But for those who delve deeper, it's a warning about how the spotlight may occasionally shine much brighter than anyone can see. And at the heart of that story is a youngster who was never meant to be famous but became one nonetheless.